Steve, you have a question?
Do you ever see a situation where, but you have a scenario that keeps unbalancing the keystones, for example, situations you've seen somebody consecutively, and it's like, wow, this big toe continues to not hold, or talus or sacrum or whatever, by environmental things, life patterns, hidden emotions, malalignment with your true self, and things like that are actually the windows showing what it would take to actually stabilize the structure.
It's a fantastic question, Steve, and the answer is yes. So if you have a client and you're working on them, and say we'll use your big toe example that you just talked about. I'm not saying it's your big toe.
Right.
So if the client, you make the correction and then they come back in, and then you have to make a correction again to that toe, and then they come back again, you have to make a correction to that toe. What that's telling you, it's not a physical issue. It's an emotional issue that is trapped inside that joint of the big toe. And that's what will lead you into it's an emotional issue or spiritual issue. The second part of your question, another great question, is how do you affect those environmental factors? Well, sometimes you can't. I'll give you an example of that. I worked with a woman that was being bullied at work. She had just moved to LA with her husband in a 1-bedroom apartment, and she wanted to have a child. I said, I can't help you. And what I meant by that was, I can't move you back to New Jersey where you want to be. I can't buy you a house because you want more space, and I can't stop you from being bullied at work. Once she realized that, all her pain went away. Another example, and this is a hard one sometimes to hear, I was working with an elderly woman, and she was having a hard time reading. So I did a session at my office, and she was able to read beautifully. She calls me a couple weeks later. She goes, it's coming back. It's the same problem. I happen to be in the area where she lives. So I went to her home, and I'm working on her, and she's doing great. And then we hear the doorknob of a door turn, and all hell broke loose. It was her 100-year-old husband would beat the shit out of her. So that sound of hearing the doorknob, environmental factor, there's nothing I can do. But if I didn't do the session in her home, I would have never have seen or known that. Everything's a two-way street, and Kevin can attest. So sometimes you'll make a physical correction, and then it might lead you to an emotional correction, and this is why we have the different levels of voila. And then you can go back and make the physical correction, and it'll stick.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes we'll do it in class where we're doing both at the same time. Because you'll find like a joint won't move, and you start talking to them, and all of a sudden the joint just goes click.
And that's why the assessment process continues and continues and continues.
Yeah. The voila assessment runs throughout the entire session. It's not like you do an intake, you run your assessment, like just say a FMS or something, and then you base everything off of what you saw. We make a correction, we assess again. We make a correction, we set.
We're ultimately looking for emotional stability and structural stability. And then when you get there, you're more in alignment, I guess, spiritually, when those two are. That might be
you have to get all three on track. Great question, Steve.
I enjoy it. I mean, I'm fascinated by aligning with how the body honors energetics and force. So it's, it's a fascinating thing, really. And
it's also us honoring that as the practitioner. So we're basically just listening to what the body wants. We see that in class all the time. All of a sudden, everything will just shift in the client or the person that I'm doing the demonstration on. Like I worked on one guy who had been up and down the East Coast going to, the best doctors, and major back pain. He walked like a Neanderthal. He was a trainer, and I made a correction to his nose, and he starts giggling like a little kid. I'm like, "Are you okay?" He goes, "Feel stoned." And then he walked back to his desk with no back pain. He walked like a human. It was just a simple nose correction. The other aspect of that, Steve, is I had a power lifter. Has the world record for his weight group for bench and for deadlift, or squat and deadlift. And when I met him, he couldn't bend over to touch the bar. And our whole conversation was about him lifting out of anger, and he lost why he loves to lift heavy stuff. So I got him back into why he loves lifting heavy stuff. 4 days later, he sent me a video of him doing 635 pounds. Because he found out why he loved to lift heavy stuff. This is really whole body work. Because we're working with the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, all at the same time. And most modalities are trying to be reductionist. And go, oh, well, it's got to be with this meridian. It's got to be, this fascial line. It's all bullshit. It's good information, but that's all it is. It's good information. It's like Lynn not needing to know what spirit she's connecting into to get the information. Doesn't matter. You're getting the information. Because all we're doing is we're falling right into the old medical model of you need to be a specialist in this, and you need to be a specialist in this, and you need to be a specialist in this. And as massage therapists, we're going, well, that's stupid. We shouldn't do that. We need to treat the body in a whole. And then what do? You go right back to being a reductionist. And what I call is the hubris of the human. You have to know and understand things, or you think you have to know and understand things when you don't. All you have to do is get into the flow and just let it roll. What would be fun for you, Steve? This is just from my experience, and you can tell me if your experience is different. But every time I've had a first rib correction, they always crank my neck and push my first rib forward and down. And many times I find my first rib has to go back and up. So if you do the old down and in on me, you just fuck me up.
Right.
But the Voila assessment will say, no, that rib needs to go this way and that way. And then I don't end up in back or shoulder pain for weeks. Wait until I see you again. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was talking about, that there's obviously, an innate intelligence component that knows, and you're tapping into listening to that. But then when you do the correction, my guess is there's some kind of honoring of how energetic force is dealt with there. Like, it's not, in other words, I think there really are probably some thermodynamic principles and things like that. And that's the blend. You're working with innate intelligence, which a lot of people would consider more esoteric. But when the energetics are honored, it does come into being very supported by a more, I hate to say linear model, but, a more normal Newtonian physics model. Like it does all go together. Right. And I think sometimes people like to skip over that.
Let's see if I can answer it this way for you, Steve. If we use Lynn again as our example, she doesn't feel like she's being heard. Well, the client that's coming into your office is being told this is what it needs. It's also not being heard.
Right.
So once you ask the body and you start, doing the assessment, the body starts hearing, oh, you're listening to me.
Right.
And Kevin and I, we see this a lot. We'll go to make the first correction, and it just might be, a simple little correction. And then the client goes, oh, you know what? Because now they felt our energy, they felt the correction. They're like, you know what? This is what's really going on. And they do that because now they feel like they're being heard.
Right.
They are being listened to. The body is being listened to. And it's not that we're physically listening. We are, but we're also that energetic, that thermodynamic listening that you're talking about. The human soul understands that.
There's a level of energetic connection that's called the Arch-Schultz law, which says that the body is more amenable to low-level stimulus and more responsive in a positive way to low-level stimulus than high-level stimulus.
Right.
Our problem is that we have so much more of a tendency to want to overcome and overwork and attack the issue that we're having, that we send far too much energy to the body, and the body's going to resist it anyway.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a perfect example. Steve is a chiropractor, right? And he's always very good chiropractor. I love having chiropractors in my class. So we had one, Kevin, that they couldn't get the coccyx to move. And it was a simple, just downward movement for the coccyx. And all I simply asked, I go, did you ask the body if it wants to be on an inhale or an exhale? He goes, oh, I forgot. And he went back and he touched the coccyx on the exhale and just went click. He goes, is that easy? I go, yeah, you just forgot to listen to all the answers.
Respect. You're respecting the body. You're not treating it as an object. You're treating it as a peer.
Exactly. And Steve, and for you also, is what you have an advantage in many ways over myself and Kevin, because if it's a physical correction and these are the vectors, you can just chiropractically boom, and it's done. It's like easy peasy. So that's where you have an advantage sometimes, which is fun.
Well, even in the beginning, I migrated toward more what in chiropractic circles is considered more tonal based techniques. I mean, that's been the big debate within chiropractic for the longest time is, like force, non-force, like even the school that I went to was founded on a non-force technique that dealt with giving the right vector into the sacrotuberous ligament. And through that vectoring, you could change the whole spine. So, that's why I was interested, when we talked about, how you'd receive the information you had and what have you. I mean, to me, something out there, like in your case, you shared how that happened or whatever, but, something wants us all to wake up to actually how things work.
Yep.
And I think a lot of different people have stumbled upon various things. And I mean, unfortunately today, most chiropractors have lost the origins of chiropractic. I mean, it's, but, it's, to me, I was always interested in the principles. Of course, I'm interested in the biomechanics, but what I like so much about this and the things that you've shared is that, it's really honoring what the body wants, and then innately the body corrects. I'm going to state this. I think it's right. I don't, I guess I'd be open to knowing different, but I definitely think that there's an us and a body. And, the us problem probably goes back to, threat patterns, places where we were vulnerable or powerless at some point, and something happened and overwhelmed our system and stuck us in some place. I think that's where some of the people in certain psychological models like internal family systems gets into, that there's parts of us that are stuck or frozen. Then you got these different protectors, but then there's a true self or a self that they try to access even within their psychological model that ends up answering their own issues for the person. But I definitely think that whatever innate is there is definitely trying to correct the structure to get the person to wake up to what's possible. So, I mean, there's really a neat relationship between emotions, the nervous system, the structure, and consciousness. So, I mean, these things, I like hearing your stories and things that you've experienced, because I have a contextual framework to really appreciate some of the experiences there. So it's neat to hear, really.
And everything is contextual, and then there are some corrections that do need force. There it goes. Yeah, I'm not talking about a crazy force, but it does take some pressure to make that physical correction. And sometimes it is a non-force correction. I had a guy, he's an AK chiropractor in Hawaii. I think he's been practicing for like 40 years. And he took my course and he goes, Joel, he goes, this is basically the origins of chiropractic. This is what chiropractic used to be, and it's gone on.
I'm a chiropractor in Honolulu. I've been doing energy work for about 30 years. I've been to a lot of seminars. I do about 50 to 75 hours a year of postgraduate study. And I can tell you that if you're into energy healing, this method is a quantum leap beyond anything else that's being taught out there. If you're truly into energy healing and you want to understand the quantum conversation, you need to attend this seminar because it goes well beyond what is standard knowledge into the realm of the quantum field.